Be one sec.
And so when everyone's presenting, we should probably turn our videos off unless you're the presenter. And then during the Q&A, we'll all put our videos back on.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. All right. Coming up. Come on in, everybody. Welcome. We can pretend we're in person, right?
That means everyone's in the break room getting all those high quality snacks.
Creamery ice cream. I don't know. An afternoon snack, right?
I'm telling you, I miss those. Yeah. And I don't have my snow tires on my car because I always put snow tires on before going to this conference, but now that I'm not going, I don't have them on.
Yeah, this year it's been pretty nice so far. It's just 2:30 now, so we'll wait a few minutes and let some people get in. I do like the platform we're on, the lobby, and have you done that, Stan? The exhibitor areas, and it's very nice. And able to actually, chat with people and communicate and have some communication. So it's definitely a plus.
No, I think it's one of the more interactive platforms that I've seen in this whole Zoom world.
We'll wait another minute or so. We still got people coming in. Oh, we're about 2 minutes in. We might as well get started, and the stragglers can come in from the concession area, right? So welcome everybody. Welcome to session number 5E. It's 2:30 right now. My name is David DeGioia. I'm with McMahon Associates. I've worked with Stan Caldwell here to put together a wonderful panel discussion. Part 1 of our Smart Cities Shared Mobility in a Post-COVID World. Again, this is our first session today, and tomorrow we'll have another session at 11:30. So our bios are all online. Take a look, read them, I hope. We're going to have some introductions, everybody, and then go to a panel discussion. So when we get to the panel, please feel free to turn your view to gallery view so you can see everybody talking. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Stan Caldwell, who's the executive director of both the Traffic 21 Institute and the US DOT designated Mobility 21 National University Transportation Center at Carnegie Mellon. So Stan has been helped us pull this all together, and turn it over to Stan to kind of get things rolling.
All right, thank you very much, David. As David mentioned, we've been kind of doing these broader smart city panels the last few years at this conference to really expose the group to smart city activity with transportation and beyond. But this year, with COVID really changing the whole landscape of how things are done, we really wanted to focus on this as a topic, and not just the reactions to COVID, but how we're really looking at a post-COVID world, because we're seeing that there's going to be, especially with telework and e-commerce, there's going to be a lot of changes to our mobility system that we feel they're going to be long lasting. And so we're kind of curious of how in this session, shared mobility professionals are really looking at some of these changes and what they're looking for into the future. So our first speaker is going to be Mark Castle from SEPTA. He's a director of service planning there. And then second is will be Lolly Walsh, who's with the she's the integrated mobility manager with Move 412, which is a really interesting collaboration with the City of Pittsburgh Department of Mobility and Infrastructure and a lot of community organizations. And we're going to have Ngani and Dimby from the PennDOT, Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. She is and she's an executive policy specialist, and she was formerly with CMU. She was our Women in Transportation Fellow at Traffic 21. So we're glad to have her involved. So first, I'd like to welcome Mark Castle to give us an update on what the perspective is from SEPTA.
Thank you very much, Stan. I think it's noteworthy that SEPTA is in a position to really move people in an essential way. We don't get our stores shelf stocked, hospitals, nursing homes, et cetera, don't get staffing unless transit is operating and we are considered an essential service. So we reacted early on to COVID-19 through trying to kind of focus our attention on the most important routes that serve the most critical needs within the community, because just like a lot of other businesses, we were affected by the health side of COVID-19 in that our staffing was reduced quite a bit. And so that happened both on our regional rail system and on our bus and surface transportation network. So we had to scale back on the number of routes that we offered initially during the pandemic, and have been slowly bringing service back in and adjusting for social distancing and to accommodate the needs of the community. A big part of what we have to do is to make the customers feel comfortable, safe, socially distanced on the vehicles. And so we put together an action plan for safe travel. This particular chart is available from our website. If you go on it, on the homepage in the lower right-hand corner, there's a whole COVID section. One of the strategies that we really had to deal with was flattening our peak periods. Basically, the traditional office workers in many cases were teleworking. It was primarily the people that worked in the medical industry, in the service industry, that were continuing to travel. And as we know, a lot of those people work at different shift times. And so our peak period ridership was diminished. Our midday ridership and some of our off-peak times actually was increased because people were going out for appointments to deal with their day-to-day activities that they needed to do. And so we had to look at how we adjusted our service to provide a more even travel times and headways during the entire workday or the weekday, and also dealing with weekends because we have a lot of people that work on the weekends as well. So this is just a quick view of some of the scenarios that we work with a consultant on to try to take a look at how we would address ridership. Our ridership currently is down about 65% on transit and more in the 85% range on a regional rail network. So we started out on the left with our reduced or lifeline service, which was really tied to connecting to major locations such as hospitals, grocery stores, pharmacies, nursing homes, et cetera. And we had GIS maps that we developed for that. We've gone into modified service, adjusting for reduced ridership, but still allowing for social distancing. And this is all leading into what's called CBNR, our comprehensive bus network redesign, that we are in the process of getting consultants on board. It's actually going to our board of directors this month to approve the team that's going to be working on that project with SEPTA staff, how we design the network for the next 10 to 20 years, because a lot of our routes are based on legacy workflows that aren't necessarily happening anymore. So went through and took quickly a look at what the elements of shared mobility are all about. So we're looking at new models of service. We have a pilot that we're working on with a grant that we received from Via Mobility to look at how we bring people to and from third shift jobs, primarily in distribution and warehousing jobs. And this is targeted in Bucks County and in the eastern part of our service area. And we're in the process of putting together the service model for that using one of our paratransit contractors to do that service. And we've been directing a lot of more activity to our transportation management associations in southeastern Pennsylvania, where it's not able for SEPTA to cost effectively provide access to service, but the TMAs can work with van pools and other options to try to connect to our system or to provide direct access, primarily during second and third shift hours. We're trying to be efficient in running our network, really focusing on connectivity, not one-seat rides necessarily, two-seat rides in many cases, but using the network efficiently. And so we've come up with a frequency network based on 15 minutes or less service 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday. This is a trend that's going on within the industry to try to make the services that are most critical more understandable for the customer. As I mentioned, we're going into our comprehensive bus network redesign and trying to integrate technology through the use of our SEPTA Key system, which is our new fare card, which has either monthly or weekly passes, or you can have what's called a travel wallet, which allows for individual trips for people that don't ride the system quite as frequently. And we expect that we're going to see a lot more of that as people start to come back to the system, but they may be commuting 2 or 3 days a week as opposed to 5 days a week.
Hey, Mark, your
Yes.
slides stopped on back on number 1.
Oh, really? Okay, because I'm still seeing them. Let me try escaping here. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Mark, I can run them too if you want. Just let me know.
Okay, let me. Are you seeing them now?
Yep.
Okay, let me scroll through quickly to where we are. It's this action plan, flatten the peak, ridership projections, shared mobility, the network. We were just talking about SEPTA Key, so I think we should be okay now, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
So clean technology, electric buses and multi-level rail cars and new locomotives. We're trying to deal with legacy platforms. And so we are getting multi-level cars so that we can get more people on the regional rail system without having to rebuild new platforms. The electric buses are currently running on 2 routes in South Philadelphia, and we're in the process of doing a study to look at how we would expand that into other parts of the network. Equity is a big part of what we're looking at right now, and we have made adjustments to our fare structure to reduce what was called a transfer penalty. We were charging for people that would transfer from one route to another. We've modified that, and we've expanded from age 5 to age 12, the ceiling for children riding on the system, with the understanding that Philadelphia has the largest population of people in poverty of any major city in the United States. And so trying to make the system more equitable through managing fares so that the cost of riding the system is not exorbitant for them. Social benefits. We've gone through a process of working with many partners on bus stop design, trying to make bus stops more apparent within the system, trying to deal with ADA issues, and we work quite a bit with consultants and engineers in that regards. We're moving forward on a trolley modernization project, again, to expand capacity, but also deal with our ADA issues. And then we have the King of Prussia rail extension. King of Prussia is the largest major hub of activity that isn't served by a rail service currently. Our Center City and our University City districts are served by a Market Frankfurt line and other rail opportunities. But the King of Prussia area, which is the 3rd largest employment center within Philadelphia, does not have anything but bus service at this time. And it's unreliable because it operates on the Schuylkill Expressway in many cases, which is very congested at times. And so We're looking at a project, we're going into the final EIS for the King of Prussia Rail Extension. That's a really exciting project. So our takeaways from this is that we want to be the primary transportation provider for the Philadelphia region, but we also want to work collaboratively with our county, our state partners, our local governments, and with the development community and the business community. The competitive challenges remain. We expect that Uber and Lyft and other sources of transportation, bike share, will also be part of the mix as we go forward. Ridership is expected to be slow to rebound, and we anticipate that some of it may never come back to the system because of changes in travel patterns. We want to continue to focus on innovation, and as I mentioned, the collaboration is going to be key as we go forward.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark. Lolly is up next, and while Lolly is setting up, I'd like to remind everyone that David is tracking any questions that come in, and so you can post questions for the presenters or the group in general in the Q&A or in the chat, and we will address the questions after the three presenters have presented. Lolly, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks for having me, everybody. I'm Lolly Walsh with Move 412, and I'm the Integrated Mobility Manager. And unlike SEPTA, we are very unestablished so far. It's a brand new program, and so I have a little bit of introduction to share with you, and then talk about how we are trying to use the program that was initiated prior to COVID to rope in and use some of the services that we have to enable people to get to work and get back to all other elements of life as safely as possible.
Lolly, I don't see your slides. There you go.
Oh, just pop it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, just gonna move this out of the way. I'm not going to spend too much time on this intro stuff, but if you're not from Pittsburgh, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure is basically our Department of Transportation. It's a brand new department. It's just about 2 years old. And so soon after launching, the department put out a request for proposals to address some of the needs that are lacking in the city, that there's a number of neighborhoods that have not had access to transit, and the different types of options that would enable them to make the choices to live as full life as possible. So DOMI put out a request for proposals to bring in all of these different providers and try to make sense of all of them. And the most compelling sample was submitted by SPIN. And they brought together an idea where they would collaborate with local Port Authority, our transit system, Healthy Ride, our bike share, and bring in other new sources like Spin, an electric scooter company, which is one of the ways that we are hoping to initially assist essential workers during the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak. And as I'll share, we have had some difficulties with the legislature and getting that passed and making it possible in order to provide those resources to essential workers or to just essential people, just people. So we also have Waze and Zipcar, which are part of the city. And so Spin is essentially the new one that will be coming in at this point. And we're working on collaborating, bringing everything together physically and digitally. So it's a 2-year pilot that we're doing to bring out all of these different services and make sure that they're working together rather than competing, with the guiding principle that we want accountability from the companies so that they match with all of the goals of the city, and we bring choice to people everywhere, and with a lens of equity, which is just a little easy for me to remember as ACE. Our original goals were pretty basic: expand options and access to everybody, support transit, and make it easier for people to take transit by bringing different routes and different options to get to some of the better routes that are available throughout the city. And of course, reduce the need for car ownership so that everybody could still have a car if they would like, but that nobody needs to spend money on one if they would not like to. We're working on connecting all of these different options at 50 different locations around the city, which we're calling mobility hubs. And they are, we're going to connect all of these different not all of the modes at once, but we're hoping to have 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 or 7 different types connected in the future so that you can zip from one thing to another and also transfer very seamlessly using a single app. One of the main problems with a lot of the new mobility that's available, all of the mobility that's available, is that there are way too many apps, way too many transit trip planning options. And if you want to go from one thing to another, then you may have to have 7 different apps to figure out what you're going to do. And we want to eliminate some of that irritation and make things a lot smoother for people. So those were the initial goals that started prior to any knowledge that we would be dealing with COVID-19. And I started this position essentially when COVID started making life miserable for everybody, and everybody started working from home. And so right away, our work was refocused with the goal of helping support the transit, because they were trying not to have people take Port Authority. The routes were being cut back, drivers were getting sick, and so service was very unreliable for many of the people who still had to go to work, namely, of course, the hospital staff and the people who keep us all alive by selling us food every day. Of course, there's a number of other essential workers that I won't name every one of them, but we pivoted our efforts for a good while to attempt to get the legislation passed so that we could legalize e-scooters. Pennsylvania currently does not allow e-scooters because they're not classified. And so we have to have this change in order for them to be legally used on the street. And even though they are currently privately owned, many people own them and you can see them zipping around the city. It's not currently possible for the city to provide this as an option. And this is one of the ways that we were hoping that we could work with some of the major employers. We were working with Giant Eagle and Allegheny Health Network and UPMC to try to bring some perhaps a scooter rental, like a monthly rental to essential workers, bike share rentals. And by the time our efforts for the first couple of months after the start of the pandemic turns into nothing positive from the state, we put a slight pause on the work of the essential workers at the time because things started to open up again in the summer. It seemed a little bit more positive, and but probably was just misjudgment. And so we are currently refocused again on moving forward to provide other options past the winter to hopefully be able to provide some other options so people can take things besides transit if they're not comfortable doing so, and perhaps if they do not own a car. We have also, we have been supporting Healthy Ride in their quest to become electrified, which will help reach a lot more neighborhoods in Pittsburgh. If you're not from or in Pittsburgh or familiar with it, it's basically like living in a gym. That's how I think of it. And so there's a lot of hills that are very difficult to access with just a regular pedal bicycle. And so accessing and improving access to different types of shared mobility in a safe way after COVID, so we can get everybody back to work and back to everything that they want to get to, is what we're hoping to do, as our fingers are crossed with although that's not the most effective way to have things done with the state. Our fingers are crossed as we continue to try to push for that and are excited about moving towards other forms of shared mobility as well. If you have any more questions beyond the panel, you can get in touch with me at lw@move412. Move412 is our website as well. And when it's not COVID, our office is in Oakland. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Lolly. And next, we're going to have Ngani and Dimby present from the PennDOT perspective. And again, as a reminder, please put any questions in the chat or Q&A sections. We'll monitor those and answer questions after Ngani gives her presentation.
Great. Hi, thanks everyone. Again, I'm Ngani Dimby. I'm an executive policy specialist at PennDOT. I'm going to talk a little bit about micromobility and COVID-19. So I'm really blessed to be able to co-lead the department's conversation on micromobility and especially e-scooters, along with my friend and colleague Roy Gothy, who is the statewide bike ped coordinator. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the conversation we've convened at the department, both related to to lots of various forms of micromobility, as well as to the pandemic's impacts on micromobility and the pandemic in general. So I will also give some other contextual comments about what we've seen in the world of micromobility. So just to give an idea of what we're talking about here, micromobility is a broad concept that involves the devices that you see here on the left side of the screen. So the skateboard, the bicycle, the scooter. So these being the traditional versions. So just reminding everyone that actually micromobility includes all of these devices that you see here. But what we tend to see discussed are the e-versions as well. So I just like to remind people that micromobility is a conversation that encompasses all of these vehicles and all of these vehicles and devices and vehicle and device types, partially because they have a similarly narrow speed range and a lot of the same form factors, as you can see, right? There isn't a huge difference in the form factors of any of these devices. And the speed differential is not actually really, really huge when we compare it to really all of the vehicles that share the road. So micromobility is a conversation that involves all of these vehicles and devices, but powered micromobility tends to get a lot of the focus these days. So that's the things that we see on the right side of the screen. Because, as Lolly was mentioning, only the scooter, that third device, the scooter is also not defined in Title 75, nor is the skateboard. And then, of course, e-skateboard, and as Lolly was mentioning, the e-scooter is classified as a motor vehicle, and because it doesn't meet the titling and registration requirements for a motor vehicle, it is then not deemed legal to ride on the roadways. So that leaves just our mighty bicycle and the zippy e-bike as being the two types of micromobility devices that are legal right now to ride on Pennsylvania roadways. And I'll focus a lot of my comments and my commentary about these two and a little bit. So COVID brought a lot of conversation to the world of micromobility. And I think one of the things that a lot of people you probably all saw in your own communities is that there were a lot of people riding bikes and people trying to get their hands on bikes and not being able to get their hands on bikes. This is a ABC article from early within the pandemic in Harrisburg. So this is a Philadelphia Inquirer headline, again, about how busy bike shops have been. Both bike traditional bicycles and as well as e-bikes were selling really high. Or we're selling a lot. Lots of bike shops are reporting more than 100% greater, 100% increase in sales from the same times points in the year from the year before, which is amazing. But there's also been a downside to COVID's impact on micromobility. So in Harrisburg and across lots of smaller cities in Pennsylvania, we actually saw a loss specifically of micromobility in the form of bike share. Actually, their bike share provider, Zagster, going out of business or ending operation in the city. So that was Harrisburg situation. State College's situation was also Zagster was the provider, Allentown and Lancaster, and perhaps more municipalities in Pennsylvania. So within the department, my colleague, Roger Cohen, has been leading conversations about COVID. We've gathered a bunch of people in both academia and industry within a COVID roundtable. Specifically, we have folks, including Stan Caldwell, who are really well-rounded in their knowledge, but we have specific folks who are very knowledgeable about aviation, bicycles, bike ped interest, finance, transportation finance, construction, freight and trucking, and many other facets of transportation. And we brought them all together to both talk about what are the current impacts, and then also what do we project to be the post-COVID landscape of mobility. So in particular, that group has talked about the trends that I've listed here. And very interestingly, we sent out a survey. We did a surveying effort as well to a number of transportation planners as well as transit agencies. And those professionals within the industry actually ranked the likelihood of seeing these trends in the way that I have them listed here. So increased micromobility as being the kind of the least likely, but not completely unlikely. The survey results show that they thought that all of these things were likely. But interestingly, we also had them rank in terms of what the impacts would be. And that's when increased micromobility jumped to the top as being potentially very impactful were it to become more prevalent. The only other thought that I really wanted to add is that I think, as Lolly was mentioning, I think on the e-scooter front, I think we've seen a lot of people choose private ownership of e-scooters and are using them on our roadways. So that is an actual decision that I think I've, at least anecdotally, I've seen a lot more e-scooter use here in Harrisburg, and people have opted for that as an additional mobility tool. And yeah, we don't currently have laws that that govern and explain how they should be used just yet. So there's so much, and I hope I've given you an idea of just how rich this topic is, and the many ways that micromobility has kind of had interplay with COVID and mobility during and as we expect after the pandemic as well.
All right, thank you very much, Ganny. If the presenters are welcome to share their screens again, we'll just have some Q&A from the audience and other topics. But I have some questions to bring up, but we do have a first question from the audience asking about, are there any thoughts to help cyclists traveling during the winter, since cycling has increased due to COVID-19? And so I think that question can be posed in two ways. One, for bike share programs, but also just for any type of cyclist or people using bike lanes. Has there been any discussion of that in Pittsburgh or Philly or statewide?
I can only speak from the transit perspective. And one of the things that we are able to do is to leverage those who are traveling by bicycle by being able to provide bike racks on all of our buses. So that makes it more of a last mile connection, particularly if there are condition issues that the bicyclist needs to deal with. We've also liberalized, because of the loss of ridership on our regional rail side, the ability to take a bike on our regional rail cars during the peak periods, because we're really not seeing much of a peak at this point. And so that's one way that we've been able to flex. I don't know how long that will last, but for the present time, that's available.
Great, thank you, Mark. Anyone else? Lala, you seeing anything in Pittsburgh? And just curious too, do you know if Healthy Ride in Pittsburgh has seen increased use during COVID or decreased use?
Well, regarding the winter biking tips right now, I haven't heard too much discussed about this, but Healthy Ride has been having astronomical increases since the start of COVID, both across all of their subscription types, but particularly the pay-as-you-go option, where you just rent it for, I think, $2 maybe. I've never done that one. I just have a membership. But that one had never been very popular before, and it's like going through the roof. They're doing tremendous business, it sounds.
So go ahead.
But one other thing that I would add is that I think that as when you ride a bike during the winter, one of the challenges can be just roadside debris, and then also buildup of snow or other things in the area of the road that the bicyclists will often traditionally occupy, or even in a bike lane, frankly, because the bike lanes are often to the right of the road near the curb. So depending on the municipality that you're in, there's usually a municipal line that you can call to fix a municipal road. But then if it's a PennDOT road, if you're taking a state road, then you can call 1-800-FIX-ROAD. That's a really great way to just let us know that there's debris, that there's snow, there's whatever that's in the path that's making it less safe to ride. I would say, I mean, as not speaking as specifically as a PennDOT employee, but more as a winter cyclist of many years, I would just otherwise say that get good gear and get some good knobby tires, and then enjoy yourself. It's beautiful all winter long.
So in general, do you particularly from if there's more concern from the transit, as Mark said, there's a 60-some% reduction in the bus side and 80-some% reduction in the rail side. Do you guys see more of a trend in people going to kind of individualized shared mobility, such as the bike share or even other types of micromobility, either anecdotally or with any data?
I think it's kind of going to end up being a mixed bag, because from the transportation network company side of things, there are some people that are concerned, I would think, about getting into a vehicle that they're not familiar with. Conversely, they are at least by themselves, whereas on transit, that's part of the reason that we have been really stressing the whole cleaning operation. Early on in the pandemic, we were actually taking operators that were not assigned to specific routes and putting them on cleaning duty. We've had to really adjust some of our service to allow for stations to be clean, for example. We used to, during the pre-pandemic period, have 24-hour service on the weekends on our 2 high-speed lines that connected into Center City, Philadelphia, the Market Frankfurt and the Broad Street line. Because of the fact that there isn't a lot of nighttime activity, but also to allow for additional cleaning, we've suspended that overnight service on those 2 lines and are busing instead to provide access. We're also moving forward with a plan to shut some of our trolley system down at night and transfer people again to bus so that we can do extra cleaning, so that we can build confidence amongst the public. So there's pluses and minuses, I think, in both arenas. And so, I mean, from the bike share standpoint, I would think that part of the motivation behind a bike share is that you're out in the open air and you're not around other people, you know, except for when you're maybe parking your bike or getting on and off. So.
Good, thank you. Gani or Lolly?
I know that Healthy Ride has been doing, has ramped up all of their cleaning and sanitation efforts since the very beginning of COVID. And even though people have had a great deal of apprehension about getting back on transit, they definitely have not had any nervousness about sharing bicycles. And it's a lot easier to carry a little hand sanitizer that you can spray on the grips than it is to get into a bus. And so I have biked for 15-ish years, a lot of times in Pittsburgh, but I lived in New Orleans for the last 6 years, so I'm uncertain about winter again. And so it's going to be a bit of a challenge personally. And I wasn't here last year when when COVID got sort of ramped up until April. So it's going to be a lot that we'll just have to see how it happens.
I would just add that I think that there's a private ownership side of things that has really taken off. So I would, the stats and the trends that everyone has seen reflect the fact that people have decided to become private owners of bicycles a lot. There's also good anecdotal, both anecdotal and then some actual good data that suggests that e-scooters have also been selling really well and that people have been adopting that as a private mobility option. So I think that for me is a particularly interesting trend that yes, both bike share has been going well, but then also people have been privately adopting, but then each of those models has their benefits and downsides, right? So I think that I just want to bring that into the conversation that people have been, kind of supplementing what is maybe available in a shared situation with private ownership, if they so choose, or as they've deemed necessary.
Are you guys seeing examples of how the roadways can be kind of repurposed? So if we're not getting as much traffic in a central business district, how some of the roadways are being repurposed? We know they're doing that for restaurants, but anything to accommodate more biking or micromobility, some of these other options that are out there, kind of, like Mark gave the example of having the bikes on the transit vehicles themselves.
City of Philadelphia has been increasingly installing protected bike lanes, and our interface with that is making sure that those bike lanes allow for buses to continue to move. We also have been working with the city on a project to look at installing a bus lane on John F. Kennedy Boulevard and Market Street west of City Hall, which is for people that are familiar, our Penn Center area, with the idea of being able to move buses through those areas more effectively. There are also on corridors that have protected bike lanes that are on the left side of the road. And so coordinating all those movements with deliveries and with the regular traffic flow has been an interesting challenge for all the parties involved, but that's, we haven't necessarily seen the tests along the lines of what Boston has done, the Boston area has done with actually putting in temporary bus lanes and as an experiment. I guess we've been maybe a little bit reluctant for some of the pushback that can come from that, but we have been moving forward and collaboratively with the city on these projects and taking the opportunities of dealing with less traffic on the streets.
Thank you, Mark. Anyone else?
also just add that we have been dealing with a number of requests. My colleagues at PennDOT have dealt with a number of requests related, especially to dining uses of the right of way, and especially earlier in the pandemic. I would say that the difference there has been that it was mostly for dining, and also trying to create policies that would be able to be flexible enough for use throughout the state. But I have been heartened to see just the number of ways that municipalities within the state, as well as municipalities elsewhere within the country, have been repurposing right of way. I think Seattle probably being that shining example of doing repurposing many miles, I think dozens, maybe around 30 miles of roads for people to be able to bike and walk more, which is really great use of shared space.
We've had two cases in Chester County within our territory where there have been street closures that have taken place as a result of restaurant requests, and both of them were on state highways. One was fortunately off of a bus route. The other one was actually on a bus route and caused some level of disruption to the route. And so I guess for those who are listening here, I would urge, if that continues to go forward in your communities, that you take into account the fact that transit may end up having to divert, in some cases, into neighborhoods that aren't used to having buses go through, and that's an issue that needs to be considered in the process of developing those proposals.
Thank you. There's a question from the audience for Lolly about your thoughts on the expectations from Pittsburgh's micromobility perspective and the future interactions with the BRT system. And for those not from Pittsburgh, the city was just awarded a bus rapid transit grant that would connect the downtown business district with Oakland, where the universities are. It's about a 3-mile section, but it's a comprehensive bus rapid transit program. Lolly, have you guys been looking at the integration with BRT?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge and exciting project that I'm very excited is going in, and is a great way that we can bring together the future mobility hubs and the services to connect people to those BRT routes from different parts of the neighborhood or city, so that they can go to reach some of these high employment centers of Oakland and downtown, which are, I think, have something upwards of 50,000 jobs apiece. And so the future BRT stations are a huge consideration for where we're putting in the mobility hubs, in addition to all of the other things that we're considering for the locations. But to make sure that for any of the areas that are planned, that are close to the BRT, that the parts that make up the mobility hub, the charging station, any other amenities are flexible and can be moved to a different area during the construction process, and after, if necessary.
Yeah, the question mentioned the kind of first mile, last mile travel. So can you talk a little bit about how these micro mobility hubs at close to the BRT stations will provide first mile, last mile service?
So yeah, not every mobility hub will be serving the first mile, first mile, last mile need, and in a lot of ways, the mobility options, the micromobility that is appearing that is close to them, will likely be helping people get to workplaces that they rapidly get to through Oakland, through the bus, and then are just not quite close enough, so they can hop on a scooter at their scooter, a bike, electric skateboard, anything that we can in the future get on the road for people, and then take that to where they need to work or run their errands. And then they won't have to necessarily, all of the options will not necessarily be at a mobility hub, so they wouldn't have to return it. They wouldn't have to go back there to return their scooter or bike or zip car.
Great, thank you. There's another question from the audience about our conversation about the restaurants moving out into the right-of-ways of the roads. Are there anticipated concerns about this from a roadway standpoint as far as snow removal and micromobility, other kind of issues with essentially the restaurants taking over the travel lanes? Are there expected impacts to safety or other travel uses because of this? Have you seen any evidence of that in any of these areas?
In Pittsburgh, the first place that was closed was right where the office would be if we had one right now, on Oakland Avenue. And the one block of it is closed so that there's restaurant seating, but there's also additional seating, which I'm a huge fan of, that anybody can sit there. You don't have to purchase something from a particular business. And that's something that I think is hugely lacking in the places where cities expanded to give more space for COVID, is that so much of it was just dining for a particular business and not acknowledging the fact that people just need to not always be sitting at their homes for 9 months. And so the one in Oakland Avenue, there is no traffic on that block anyway. So snow removal and danger isn't really a concern. But for some of the other ones, it definitely would be more of a concern, and one that I am not an expert at addressing and would have to find out more from somebody who knows about that sort of stuff.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that?
I think the bigger issue in Philadelphia has been with the rerouting of buses in Center City for some of these restaurant projects. The one that comes to mind, Lolly mentioned just having access for people to just come and sit. Some of ours have been adjacent to like our Rittenhouse Square Park area, so that wasn't so much of an issue. It's just more a matter of bicyclists or the TNC drivers having to maneuver around the particular location that's closed, which puts them basically in the same stead as a bus that would have to relocate if it was on a corridor where there's bus service.
Thank you.
I would just add that it sort of plays into sort of just where we were pre-COVID, where we were expecting and seeing like TNC's creating a whole bunch of demand for curb space. And so just really having these same spaces be really sought after by a variety of different modes, by vehicles of a variety of different speeds, and now adding an increased demand for outdoor dining as like an additional use of either the actual roadway or the sidewalk is just kind of stacked on top of it. But I mean, it's also what we are always doing in cities, right? So I think in cities, the conversation is always what is the best use of the shared space that we have, the shared public space that we have to make to best address public needs. And so just balancing the needs of getting mass transit and people and spaces that are neutral and not necessarily tied to making purchases that allow people to kind of give them a space that's outside of their home that is, again, still safe, right? So how do we continue to create safe spaces, which these shared public spaces can be, especially if VMT is being reduced, right? So if we have fewer people traveling, what then is the best use of that space? What is the best societal use of this shared space?
So that kind of leads into the next question of if we do expect long-term effects of telework and e-commerce, delivery of packages and less, retail foot traffic, how do you see the long-term, 2 years and out impacts after COVID to what you're working on? Just with those two things in mind. We don't know what percentages, but just assuming that there will be a certain percentage of people that continue to do more online shopping and working from home.
I think from the transit side, it may have the ability to exacerbate problems that we're already seeing. A lot of people don't realize that there is a large residential population in our center city in Philadelphia and in some of our urban core areas. And we've been dealing over the last couple of years with some significant enforcement issues in terms of keeping, for example, our Chestnut Street bus lane open. Our surface transportation supervisors have actually been deputized to be able to write tickets for delivery vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. But the ethos of the way that they do business is that they factor into the cost of doing business the fact that they're going to get tickets. And so it's not a disincentive for them to continue to get ticketed.
I don't know if we lost
Mark, you were frozen.
On identifying specific locations where the deliveries can take place and really sticking to that and enforcing it, that it's going to continue to be a problem, even with traffic.
You went on mute, Mark. Sorry.
Did you hear what I just said, or was I on mute the whole time?
You get cut off at the end, just your last sentence.
Oh, okay. No, I just said I think it's going to continue to be an issue as we go forward, even with diminished traffic.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I guess I would say that deliveries are definitely one of the things that I think about a lot. I think in larger municipalities, it's a huge concern, and I think that depending on when companies begin competing, if they choose to begin to compete for for a lot of guaranteed 1-day delivery space, like that's really when we'll see we can expect to see things get even crazier. And I think that one of the things that I think you mentioned, Stan, that in the way that we used to sort of manage, and just in cities especially, manage and talk about freight specifically and deliveries in areas where we have restaurants, where we have businesses. Now we have really frequent, somewhat larger delivery vehicles traveling down every street, right? So my street gets deliveries, and I'm here to see them now out my window every multiple times a day, every day. So just recognizing that without good enough cost to those deliveries, things like 1-day delivery will we can expect to accelerate. So I think about that, but other things, I do hope, it is my hope that within the next 2 years, the legislature will create, at the very least, legalize private ownership of scooters. I know that there's a lot of trepidation about having fleet ownership. But we do need to create rules around these devices that are already relatively commonly used here on streets in Pennsylvania. And that's actually, we're not alone in struggling with that. New York and other places have really struggled with legalization. In fact, I think if I'm understanding correctly, Britain has gone the other way around, where they sort of have allowed pilot use of e-scooters in fleets, but private ownership is technically illegal. So anyway, I think various jurisdictions, countries are all sort of making decisions, but it is my hope that within the next little while, we have at the very least private ownership, but otherwise just really nice municipal control over fleet use as well. And I would also say, hopefully we have great, the 3 tiers of your e-bikes designated in the Title 75 in the vehicle code as well, so that we can kind of have all the similar types of e-bikes enabled as as many other states that are around us.
Thank you, Ganny. We have time for one last question, and I'm going to direct this one to Mark, because I think this is a very good question that I hadn't thought of before. But for people with disabilities, has COVID made it more difficult or less difficult to get around? And it's a good perspective from, I think, from a transit side too, that we didn't consider before.
Well, anytime that you have to reduce service, it has the potential to make it harder for people to get around. One thing I will say is that our customized community transportation, which is our ADA paratransit service, has been significantly diminished in demand because of COVID and the fact that people were traveling less. And so to the extent that there were challenges in scheduling people for those services, they were able to accommodate them probably a little bit more under the COVID situation because of lessened demand. Our vehicles all are ADA accessible, and so just as long as they're running, there's access. One thing I will say, and I would like to put a pitch in for PennDOT, the PennDOT Connects program has really done a lot, I think, to help us identify ways to improve ADA accessibility to our fixed route transit system. When we're dealing with our district office in District 6, and where we're dealing with major projects that the department's working on, we're getting increasingly involved early in the process. My pitch to those in the audience who work with municipalities, with planning commissions, and with private developers is we don't have a place at the table under the municipality's planning code necessarily to review plans. ADA accessibility for the disabled is an important part of how we provide fixed route transit and make it work for people with disabilities. And so I would urge you to take a look at our bus stop design guidelines, to reach out to me, mcastle@septa.org, if you're in the Philadelphia area, the 5-county region. PennDOT is working on a better bus stop design guide, which I believe is another session in this conference. And so I urge you to take a look at those things, because that's how we make the built environment work better for persons with disabilities and really take advantage of the opportunities that we have right now.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Ganny, and thank you, Lolly, for all of your insights. And most importantly, thank you, David, for organizing all of us here. And David, this was such a big topic that he created 2 sessions. So he and my coworker, Lisa K. Schweier, will be moderating another session tomorrow. What time is that, David?
Tomorrow at 11 o'clock, 11:30.
All right, so 11 o'clock or 11-ish.
11:30.
The next session, if you want to hear even more on this topic. So thank you all for participating, and please enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Stan. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Yep. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Thanks.